The global agricultural trade market experienced a dramatic jolt following the sudden announcement of tariffs by the newly elected U.S. President Donald Trump. In an unexpected move that sent shockwaves through international markets, President Trump unveiled a sweeping new economic policy that imposed steep tariffs on a wide range of goods from longtime trade partners. Among the industries hit hardest by the cascading effects of these tariffs was the U.S. soybean sector, a key pillar of American agricultural exports. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. Almost immediately after the announcement, major soybean buyers across the globe began pulling out of previously arranged deals with American suppliers. Shipments of U.S. soybeans already en route to international ports were rejected mid-journey or diverted. Buyers scrambled to cancel purchase orders, citing the sudden increase in cost due to retaliatory tariffs that their own governments had imposed in response to Trump's actions. It was not just a matter of politics. The economics of the deal no longer made sense. For many of these countries, buying U.S. soybeans became prohibitively expensive. Simultaneously, American agribusinesses faced a new challenge. Sourcing vital goods and machinery from overseas was now subject to equally punishing tariffs, straining their operational capacity and long-term profitability. With international buyers withdrawing en masse from the U.S. market, attention turned sharply northward to Canada. Known for its stability and reliable trade practices, Canada became an immediate beneficiary of the fallout from the U.S. policy shift. Importers in countries like China, Japan, the European Union, and even developing nations in Southeast Asia and South America began engaging Canadian soybean exporters with an urgency that reflected a global scramble to reconfigure supply chains. Canadian ports, warehouses, and logistical hubs were suddenly flooded with demand that far exceeded their typical seasonal peaks. Exporters, who had previously struggled to compete with the sheer scale and pricing power of U.S. producers, now found themselves at the center of a global agricultural pivot. This unexpected windfall for Canada was not without growing pains. The infrastructure supporting Canada's soybean industry was unprepared for the sheer volume of interest. Transportation bottlenecks, storage capacity issues, and an overwhelmed customs apparatus created temporary delays and confusion. Still, the underlying reality remained clear. Canada had become the new nexus for international soybean trade, and with it came economic opportunities not seen in decades. For U.S. soybean farmers, however, the landscape turned bleak overnight. Fields that had been planted with the expectation of strong export sales were suddenly producing crops that few buyers wanted. The timing couldn't have been worse. Many had invested heavily in fertilizers, new machinery, and labor in anticipation of a solid harvest season. What they now faced was a surplus of unsold product, declining prices, and the daunting prospect of financial instability. Grain silos filled to capacity. Rural banks, which often extend credit lines to farmers during planting season, began calling in loans and tightening financing terms. The ripple effect spread throughout agricultural communities that had already been vulnerable to economic downturns in recent years. Domestically, the reaction among U.S. agribusiness leaders and trade experts was one of deep concern. Years of building trust and dependability with overseas partners had been undercut in a matter of days. The U.S. had long been a leader in global soybean exports, in large part due to its consistent quality, vast production capacity, and well-developed distribution infrastructure. That dominance was now in serious jeopardy. Countries that had relied on U.S. soybeans as a staple component in their food systems and industrial processes were seeking long-term alternatives. Even if the tariffs were eventually rolled back, many international buyers expressed a desire to avoid such geopolitical risk in the future. In Canada, the surge in demand led to a revaluation of the country's agricultural priorities. Government officials, industry stakeholders, and private investors began channeling resources into expanding processing facilities, upgrading port infrastructure, and providing incentives for farmers to increase acreage devoted to soybean cultivation. Provinces like Ontario and Manitoba, already significant contributors to Canada's soybean output, saw rapid increases in land prices and agribusiness investments. What had begun as a reaction to a policy shock quickly evolved into a strategic national effort to capitalize on a rare geopolitical opportunity. Meanwhile, secondary effects from the U.S. tariffs continued to mount. The supply of affordable soybeans for domestic use in the United States became distorted. With fewer export opportunities, There was a glut in the local market, driving prices down but paradoxically harming farmers due to the sheer volume of unsellable product. Livestock producers and food manufacturers benefited from lower soybean prices temporarily, but even they expressed concerns over the long-term viability of the supply chain. The unpredictability of future trade policy made it difficult to plan purchases or investments. The tariffs also complicated the flow of agricultural equipment, fertilizers, and other necessary imports for U.S. farms. These goods, many of which are manufactured abroad or require components from international suppliers, became more expensive and harder to source due to retaliatory tariffs. This drove up operating costs just as revenues were collapsing, creating a double blow for the American farming sector. Family farms, in particular, found themselves at the mercy of forces far beyond their control, with many beginning to question their survival in a post-tariff economy. Internationally, governments that had previously viewed the U.S. as a vital agricultural partner began signing new bilateral agreements with Canada and other producers. Brazil and Argentina, longtime soybean exporters, also saw an uptick in demand. However, concerns over deforestation, environmental practices, and political instability in South America led many buyers to favor Canadian suppliers, whose governance and environmental standards were viewed more favorably. The result was a dramatic reshaping of the global soybean supply chain, one that placed Canada in a central role and pushed the U.S. to the margins, at least temporarily. The political symbolism of the event was just as significant as its economic consequences. For decades, the U.S. had wielded agricultural exports as a soft power tool, forging alliances and strengthening economic ties through food security and supply stability. The sudden retreat from this role under a new presidential administration sent a strong message to the world. The United States was no longer a predictable trade partner. This shift sowed distrust, not only among America's adversaries, but also among its closest allies, many of whom had come to rely on the consistent trade policies of previous administrations. Even within the United States, the impact of the soybean debacle sparked internal political conflict. Lawmakers from heavily agricultural states voiced strong opposition to the tariffs, urging the president to reconsider or at least exempt key sectors from the sweeping trade penalties. Their pleas, however, were largely ignored or dismissed. Protests erupted in state capitals and Washington, D.C. as farmers, trade unions, and business groups coalesced around a growing sense of economic injustice. The anger was not just about lost profits, it was about the feeling of betrayal by a federal government that had failed to protect its own producers from self-inflicted harm. As the Canadian soybean industry raced to scale up operations to meet the demand surge, analysts began warning of the long-term risks associated with overextension. There were concerns about land overuse, environmental degradation, and the potential for a speculative bubble in agricultural investment. However, most policymakers argued that the benefits outweighed the risks, particularly given the new prominence of Canadian soybeans on the world stage. Efforts were made to ensure sustainability, but the focus remained firmly on maximizing the window of opportunity while it lasted. As for the U.S., the policy decision sparked a re-examination of its broader trade strategy. Economists and scholars began publishing studies detailing the financial losses incurred by the soybean sector, estimating billions in foregone exports and collateral damage to related industries. These reports made their way into legislative hearings and policy debates, adding fuel to the fire of an already polarizing political climate. While some supporters of the administration defended the tariffs as a necessary step toward correcting trade imbalances, the evidence of real-time economic harm was difficult to ignore. One of the more surprising consequences of the shift was its impact on global food security programs. U.S. soybean exports had played a vital role in supporting humanitarian food aid to developing countries. With supplies rerouted or priced out of reach, aid organizations scrambled to find alternative sources. Canada stepped up in some cases, but the speed and scale of the disruption created logistical nightmares for relief groups working on tight timelines and budgets. This raised ethical questions about the responsibilities of major producers in the global food system and whether domestic politics should be allowed to endanger international humanitarian efforts. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Trump's tariffs? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.